You can choose to live in Singapore, one of the safest countries in the world, but when things happen, are you still able to respond to that, right? And that is still part of the idea of resilience, right? Be it cyber resilience, physical security resilience, whatever you want to call it, I think that's really, at the end of the day, the pathway or the journey within the information security space. I would say some of the biggest threat is because of the convenience that is being looked to enable, right? So if it's not categorized as a malicious website or a problematic, like gambling or pornographic sites, then that is also where certain sites may get through. I don't want to call it passion because passion is very subjective, but you need to have genuine interest, energy, and capacity to look into things until 3, 5 a.m. in the morning, right? That's part of it because there's so many things to understand, so many things to learn.
Hi Tyler, welcome to the Fearless podcast. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks, Sasha. Happy to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, now it seems like, the Singapore cyber community is relatively small and we constantly bump into each other.
For sure. I mean, even with some of the past podcast guests that you have, right? Tobias, Ilya. It's really a small community over here. So thanks for the invite and happy to be here.
I'm excited for our conversation. Just for our guests to give some background about you, Tyler is a Director Enterprise Information Security at softScheck APAC, whose journey in information security began with a rather unique foundation, martial arts. And beyond that, Tyler brings years of expertise translating complex security concepts into actionable business strategy across governance, risk, compliance, security architecture, and on and on and on. And he also serves as a secretary and certified mentor with the ISC2 Singapore Chapter, where he shares valuable insights as an invited speaker across different organizations. So, first question to you, Tyler. You mentioned your journey into cybersecurity began with martial arts. So what's the story behind it and what are some parallels you can draw between those disciplines?
Well, I started doing various disciplines in martial arts since I was 6. That means primary school here in Singapore. So across the years, that kind more or less accumulated to be slightly more or less than half my life right, at this point in time. So when I was thinking about which discipline to go into during my university education in computer science, I was looking for something that contained my own character and personality, right? So I was looking into my own past experience, what I truly enjoyed, which was martial arts. And there came the idea of protection and security. Right. So, looking through the focus areas in the computer science degree, there was a specialization in information security. So as I looked through the documentations, looking to understand what is entailed within the information security specialization, I found that, hey, this really resonates with me on a fundamental level. So that's where I headed, and the rest is history.
Wow, this is such an unusual background. I think we've met our previous guests. Someone was a designer, someone was more in a traditional security space, and someone even came from military. I don't think I've spoken to anyone that started from martial arts. And I feel like when it comes to cybersecurity, the uniqueness of your background translates into whatever you do on an everyday basis. How do you think, in what way did this background influence what you do today? Kind of strategic thinking?
I think that really comes back to how you think about the entire concept, right? So in computer science, we have something called abstract thinking, right? We abstract out certain concepts and we kind of run with it. And that's something that we need to find comfort, right? Firstly, as not just as information security professionals, but anyone within the tech space. So maybe put on a very individual, personal level, I took that to the far extreme where we're talking about, security can be starting from physical security or personal security, right? Out of care and concern for my loved ones. And I evolved that to apply that into my work, my career, to the different organizations that I've served in the past. So I think that makes the transition a lot easier because the mindset has always been about how do we protect the things that we value or the people that we value, and then evolve that into how do we then become more resilient, right? In the coming back to the topic about information security, what can we do under circumstances? You can choose to live in Singapore, one of the safest countries in the world, but when things happen, are you still able to respond to that, right? And that is still part of the idea of resilience, right? Also, be it cyber resilience, physical security resilience, whatever you want to call it, I think that's really at the end of the day, the pathway or the journey within the information security space.
That's such a good response, and I love the way you compared the fact even if you're stationed in Singapore, you still might encounter so many threats, and it actually to some extent makes you more vulnerable because you don't expect them.
That's right.
And then they strike when you expect them the least.
Yeah, so it's the conscious effort to stay aware and relevant, right? And always coming back to square one, which is to not have unnecessary assumptions, especially when we're in the field of, we are executing the work in risk management, right? We cannot make blind assumptions about various things. So the concept of architecting or designing something to be secure needs to come with the corresponding validations, right? So I can live in Singapore. I can also see that, there's a lot of CCTV cameras.
Yeah.
We see our Singapore police force patrolling, right? The MRTs, the key locations within Singapore, like the Changi Airport, Jewel. We all see that. So we have that sense of understanding and security. But also on a personal level, if something happens, how fast are we expecting them to rush to our aid? Right? And that's where for me, the idea of resilience and, personal responsibility comes in as well. And for me, thankfully or fortunately, I came from a martial arts background in that sense. So that kind of forms the core of my personal protection and then expanding it outwards, right? So similar to, crown jewels, then into the additional defense in depth that you need to establish in forms of security controls.
That's very good analogy that you drew, throughout this whole journey. and you just joined a new company, softScheck APAC. Tell us a little more about your role. What brought you there? How it all started?
Yeah. So, funny story is actually, I got invited / headhunted by the leadership within softScheck. So they have met me at various conferences. We exchange ideas. We discuss about the state of things, where things can be. And along the way, they found value in what I have to offer in terms of security risk management, in order to tie that as the binding layer of what they have already traditionally been strong in, which is cyber offensive and cyber audit. So we found that synergy, we hit off well, and here I am as one of the directors. And so that's what I'll be hoping to transform as well, right? For the organization to offer the right journey into cyber resilience with our partners, with our clients, and really bring that understanding and visibility of the security fundamentals as part of our work, as part of our deliverables, and then make sure that we actually offer the true value of security by design with verification and validation, right? And deliver that value rightly to our clients and partners.
Yeah. What are some of the projects you're excited about?
I think it's really more towards, firstly, bringing across my experience into what we call URS, Unified Resilience Strategy. And that really encompasses, and I will look to model what I've experienced in the MNCs themselves, right? For example, the idea of doing it in a more agile-like manner to make sure that as the SDLC or software development lifecycle goes along, you're actually making it a secure software development lifecycle, right? Being there with them at the start, doing the architectural work, right? As part of the security design, reviewing that in depth, right? And as changes go along, able to advise our partners or the development team, right? How do we correctly think about and address the threats that are already known to, well, in a certain sense, the mankind beyond the industry, right? And addressing those threats first, right? Then we validate those threats, right? Using our cyber offensive capabilities. And this is really something that I've seen in many of the different past lives that I've lived with my past organizations, right? So that understanding gives that tactical advantage, right, to development teams who operate in an agile manner, right? The validation and actions that they need to take, right, to make sure that they're doing the right security device design development, right? Then whatever additional threats like zero-day vulnerabilities and all, then that we can address in the later stages, because that is something that we could not have accounted for during the design phase of any application system.
That's very interesting. I love how you follow along the whole journey as MNC start to develop the software, right? That it starts from the start and not at the end of the process. Because
For sure.
I believe a lot of people make this mistake like postpartum, right? They're like, okay, this is the time to fix things.
And that's where I see the difference, right, in terms of the professionals who does security risk management and those who wants to do it right. And that needs to be really the journey to have that capability, to have that resources, to really be embedded as part of that development journey, right? Because we ultimately, at the end of the day, information security is all about enabling the business, enabling not just the business stakeholders to achieve their means, but also to enable the development teams, our technology partners to really operate without fear, in a sense, coming back to the podcast, really to talk about, how can we do that in a secure manner, a security by design mindset.
I wonder, do you face any particular challenges from your customers that you speak to that they might not be entirely aware of, and you think that it kind of shines the light on the expertise that you can bring in?
I think some of the things that maybe I can just share one of the case studies in the past. So this was a project where it involved file uploads, right? And the timeline was actually kind of tight for the developers to go ahead with go live. So they came to me and we discussed about, okay, so what exactly is the business objective of this file upload security? We went very specific into, okay, what are the common scenarios you have? Do you expect any additional file types, for example, beyond your PDF and Microsoft Word files, right? So that was the conversation we had where we talked about security by design. And we realized that, hey, actually the technical enablement of this business process went far beyond what the job scope or the expectations of the business. You only need PDF and DOCX, yet you are enabling all other different file types. So when we talk about by design, coming back to the software development lifecycle, we are actually talking about, okay, how can we appropriately reduce the file types that is enabled by your function, right? Reduce that as a start. Add in your basic filter checks, right? Then we have at least have compensating controls to prevent any upfront, any problems at that layer. Then we also take a step back to look at the overall architecture diagram. Users need to be authenticated before they even have access to this file upload function, right? Coupled with this additional alterations, or what I will sometimes coin the term as security re-architecture, right? To really address those problems at those layers, right? And give that compensating factor, then the understanding of risk acceptance and everything else can be easier, right? Because if not, you're just talking about why did you not use this, file upload security tool? But that's not appropriate to the time horizon for the product to go live. So that's where we manage to mitigate the risk, present a logical and reasonable justification and understanding to the risk review board for them to say, okay, sure, let's go ahead. Right. So I think this is where the value of security design comes in, right? When we understand sufficiently and correctly tie the business objectives to the technical, to the technology enablement, and then splash our security on top of it.
That's very good approach, because it reminds me of the MVP, right?
That's right.
You just try to, minimize time and maximize efficiency when it comes to product launch. And you just have to be so conscious about your client's timeline. So it's a very good approach. And, since we touched upon file uploads, I wonder, what are your thoughts around DLP nowadays, right? There are so many issues that arise today, whether it's Gen AI websites or stuff like that. Do you see any of your clients taking this issue into consideration, or is this something you see on the top of people's minds?
So when you say clients, I will take them as internal clients in my past organizations as well.
Yeah.
So yes, file upload security is definitely on top of their mind. To your question more towards the DLP or data loss prevention measures, tools, platforms, I think that's always a good first cut hygiene practice that any and all organizations should adopt. But where it comes to more particular use cases, right, where the threat profiles of the organization or the priority of certain application systems, right, goes beyond that level of comfort, then that's where we need to talk about even more adequately into how can we layer those prevention, right, or to either upfront or at the back end, either client side or server side. I think that's where the conversation and security architecture work needs to come in to appropriately address and manage the risks around them. Yeah. So in the industry, I think the general sensing is still very regex based, which is to look for specific text-based indicators within the file types. Even to do any binary validations or security checks. I think those are all the good stuff. But at the end of the day, I think it's coming back to how can we appropriately address those issues, right, at the right layers or at the right points in time to prevent the virus, right, or the Trojan to come in and just detonate within the environment and cause material impact to the organizations.
Yeah, I agree. I think right now more and more organizations are looking for a custom approach to their security stack, their security infrastructure. So this is really where, you have to be cautious of other people's time, resources, and everything like this. So
for sure. And that's why I think enterprise security risk management is such an important thing, but it cannot just straddle at the organizational layer. There needs to be cognizant of both what I would call upstream and downstream stakeholders and their objectives. So downstream is what I would consider like application security, right? For example, what we have just talked about and discussed about, how do we really do things security by design, but also balance the, the business value drivers and objectives, right, as part of that design. So that is where, at least in my experience, where I've been fulfilling that role, right, to really try and find the right balance. And that conversation is always challenging, sometimes tiring, but always interesting.
Yeah, certainly. And it seems like, you worked across so many layers of cybersecurity, right? If you had to pick a favorite domain, what would it be?
I think if you're talking about the CISSP domain or the ISC2 domain, I would have to say that is really towards security risk assessment.
Okay.
Yeah. And the reason for that is not just because I've been doing risk assessments pretty much my entire career, but I think that really underpins a lot of considerations when executed correctly. At the core of security by design, we are always talking about, okay, how do we take in the necessary considerations, not just from a technical perspective and business perspective, but to really deep dive into what does it mean by business objectives. There is regulatory, there is legislative, right? If you look into the Singapore's context, right, by Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore, we have supplementary references to the Code of Practice, for example, and that forms both the legislative and regulatory requirements. But so we have the PDPA, DVTM, things like that talks about privacy and data protection. And these are the requirements that we always need to be aware of, not because that there's an additional function within an organization that may deal with it, but to really tacticalize certain level of understanding of those elements within the context of the application system design. Then you have the technical, where you have, CIS benchmarks, what are the basic principles that we all know, adore, and sometimes maybe get a bit tired of, right? Yeah. So to combine these factors as part of the risk assessment, to correctly threat model, for example, at the appropriate, based on the objective, right, of the application systems we are dealing with. That's, I think, is both art and science at the same time, right? Because you are talking about known factors and also unknown factors that goes into the entire process, right? So how to really present a logical and reasonable understanding, I think, is a key component of what I have done and look forward to bring forward into our unified resilience strategy at softScheck.
That's this kind of answer, this particular domain. It seems like it encompasses every single part of cybersecurity.
Security by design, for sure.
Yeah.
Right. So sometimes within the industry, you'll see that there is various conversations and different angles of how they see the difference between security risk assessment, management, and architecture, because sometimes the lines blur, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're at an enterprise level, you could be seen as an enterprise security architect, right? But when you're working on the application systems as well, running alongside or journeying alongside with the development teams, and that's when you are a application system architect, or sometimes even just a cybersecurity engineer, right? Depending on your job title. And that also kind of reflects the current state of things in terms of where aspiring professionals that wants to come to our industry would like to come in, but the focus became more on the title rather than the job functions they are serving. But again, that is a topic for another time.
No, it's a very interesting topic, and I also get the privilege of speaking with a lot of aspiring professionals who want to enter the industry. And what I notice is a lot of people take into consideration right now what is the biggest surface when it comes to attacks, right? And right now, we just had also this dinner with Jeff Moss.
Jeff Moss, right?
Yeah,
I saw that one.
Yeah, and it's I found it so intriguing. I mean, SquareX is a browser security solution, but it was interesting to see that Jeff Moss, someone who founded DEF CON Black Hat, highlighted that whether it's you doing email or internal SaaS apps, or you do anything, browser becomes the entry point for most of the attacks today. I wonder, in your experience, is this something that you see as well as you interact with internal clients, external clients? And how do you see people nowadays treating this biggest, I would say, attack surface?
So I think that conversation sometimes is very contextualized for different organizations. I've been in organizations where the technology involved actually doesn't even involve the browser at all. We also have, I also have been obviously in organizations where browser is definitely the entry point towards almost everything. I think that comes back to how we, as a start on an enterprise security level, browser is definitely one of the biggest gateway in terms of enabling the business to function, right? We Google, and now we ChatGPT, DeepSeek, Gemini, whichever you want to call it, right? All of these LLMs are out there, and all of these are available via browsers, right? Because it is through the internet. We research, we work, we use SaaS applications as well, right? So definitely, the focus of browser security can be higher, because even when we sometimes do threat modeling or when we have discussions, right, about the risks involved in the data flow diagram, the browser sometimes has been viewed as, or more often than not, been viewed as, it is just something that we need to go through, and that is, something that on an infrastructure level, or the, something that we just need to accept, because if not for the browser, how do we gain access to understanding of the internet-wide information out there, right? So I think that conversations differs from organization to organization, but definitely there is a sense of convenience tied to browsers in general, and that's where sometimes the balance between business and security gears is more inclined toward business rather than security. So for sure, I agree with. I would agree that browser is definitely one of the biggest areas that deserves a little more attention.
Yeah, and I wonder what sort of threats do you see emerging more and more nowadays, or if I could phrase it better, some threats that you think a lot of people underestimate but should take into consideration more?
I think it's the level of convenience, right? Or the level of business enablement that we're looking at where it comes to browsers. So in more secure organizations or with a heavier focus on confidentiality and prevention, right? Of data being accessed in an unauthorized manner.
Yeah.
We have, very strict lockdowns. You have VPNs. You have all the good network security layer stuff.
Yeah.
But when it comes to more towards application security or how the browser, right, really interacts with that, becomes the network security controls become a compensating control, right, towards the discussion of risk management. And so stakeholders may feel more comfortable with, okay, we already have compensating controls in place. We can prevent, if we find that, if we detect on a network layer something that they can go through, then we can detect and then therefore we can respond in an appropriate manner. So there is that towards the browser security, right? So I would say some of the biggest threat is because of the convenience that is being looked to enable, right? So if it's not categorized as a malicious website or problematic, like gambling or pornographic sites, then that is also where certain sites may get through, right? And that's where can you really detect and prevent things from happening in the first place? So the appreciation and the context in which browsers are being viewed as an enabling factor for the business to operate is a underlying assumption that has been there for the longest time as part of any considerations. So sometimes a revisit of those assumptions and considerations, I think, is a key component where we talk about security risk management, especially in context of the organizations and business.
Definitely. And right now, attackers are becoming smarter and smarter each day. And today, a lot of them use a strategy where they create a website, malicious website, do whatever activity they want, and then they create a new one, right? And then a lot of security tools, they just work on non-malicious websites. But if it's something freshly created, it's so hard to categorize in time before anything bad can happen. So this becomes a bit concern.
For sure. So I think that's also where it comes to the, I wouldn't say contention, but the expectation on security, right? Are we there to be able to prevent all the unknown and new threats to mankind? And the expectation really at that level? Or do we come back to a more reasonable approach where we're talking about, have we prevented within the resources and availability, right, of existing controls to give a measure of defense? What is consciously known to the industry and the mankind? Can we already adopt those tools in the right manner, in a budget appropriate manner, especially when we are serving as a function to the business? Can we are we able to do that first before we even look to the unknown? Right? So I think that balance is again different depending on who you talk to, but that's where I will see that stark difference, right? Because if it's something like a new zero-day attack, how would you expect the whole world to know if that is literally by definition zero-day attack, right? And then you see out there in the industry sometimes there are certain vulnerabilities that takes time to get to be publicly known or industry known for everyone to react. So that lag time is also where, in terms of incident response on a industry/global level, would have that. Already there's a measure of impact that we need to get comfortable with in terms of the understanding that because there's an unknown attack at a point in time, you cannot expect your existing security tools to able to combat that. It's the same thing as the stock market sometimes, right? How do you correctly predict something that is in the future?
Yeah.
Where, as like most, when we speak to most of financial people, past results does not,
indicate the future performance.
Exactly. It doesn't indicative of the future performance. So how do you do that? Again, the idea is simple. How can we can take care and ensure what is known, what is consciously known, right, to the security practitioners, but how do you expect them to account for the future? It's the same. I think that in the same line of thinking, there's a parallel that I often share with business stakeholders, especially with my background in BFSIs, right, banking and financial services. And that's the kind of conversation sometimes that, can you guarantee that your returns would be solid at this level? I think that's where that conversation gets a bit more intimate for the business stakeholders, and that's where we look to draw and help them understand what we are delivering for the organizations.
Yeah. I think just to elaborate on the analogy that you drew, right? At the end of the day, past performance always is a bit different from future. You cannot indicate that it's going to be 1-to-1 ratio, right? There is always overperformance or underperformance to some extent. And I think it really can be connected to cybersecurity because unlike financial performance, cyber threats keep on evolving. So you do not see in the future that there are fewer cyber threats. It would be an ideal world where with each day we have fewer cyber threats, but I think they're rising and increasing with each day.
For sure, and it evolves with the situation, right? Because at each step of the evolution, you will see that there's a new baseline in which the security threats are able to evolve on in terms of the approach. Look at it. Well, I don't like the term AI, but look at the publicly available LLMs out there these days, right? That in itself is already a new area of attacks, threats, vulnerabilities as a security professional. But therein also lies the the differing perspective that there's so much enabled in terms of technology, people, efficiency, right? Being able to craft things unknown to me previously, at the snap of my fingers, give me a baseline to work with. So there's the beauty and danger in balancing between, LLMs, at least in this case, against security, right? And look at COVID, right? Everyone would have expected the entire world will go into a recession, to go into economic dysfunction, but that didn't happen. So past performance, as we have seen in the economic crises, is not indicative of the future at that point in time as well, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's where I think the expectations should be more logical and reasonable, right? When we talk about information security risk management practices, and really to have the right security fundamentals, right? Coming back to my journey in martial arts, is to have the security fundamentals polished to the extent where you are able to correctly look at the situation calmly and respond either with your technical or administrative controls, right? And then account for the unaccountable because those are future-looking events with the right mindset. And that's really what cyber resilience is all about. And I think that is where before being professionals as humans, we need to kind of have the understanding that no one can accurately predict the future. You can have a lot of factors that go into your predictive models or predictive understanding of what would happen, but therein also lies that probability that all information security professionals are comfortable with, right? Because we cannot tell you 100%, but we can tell you 99.9, and hopefully with another 9, right? That this is the best understanding that we have at this point in time. This is the appropriate practices, not the best practices, right? The appropriate practices given the the circumstance and scenario where the balance of business and technology with the splatter of security on top of it, right, to really integrate that understanding to enable the business to move forward in the right manner.
Yeah, certainly. And whenever, I love when you keep on bringing up the martial arts background, because certainly it does influence the direction of your thought process. Because what's this? Coming back to the finance analogies,
yes.
From Intelligent Investor, there was be fearful when others are optimistic.
That's right.
Yeah, and be optimistic when others are fearful. And I think it also applies to cyber threat landscape, right?
For sure. So actually, funny thing also is that when we talk about identity access management, for example, to what level do you define, right, privilege accounts? Is it at a enterprise level where they have access to the databases, or actually the privilege actions that can be taken even at the application system level itself, right? So how do you then detect, track, and respond to this? I think it's an often missed discussion, right? Especially when we're talking about how do you then integrate this understanding from the IAM into your incident response as part of your security design, because traditional or textbook understanding will tell you focus on your system admins, look at your C-suites.
Yeah.
But what about the middle management, your team leads, the head of departments who have potentially unfiltered access, right, to all of the records, right? And that's also kind of linking back towards insider threats, right?
Yeah.
So how do you then manage those expectations? I think is also important and a often contested, let's not say contested, but often discussed topic, right, within the profession, right, on how much granularity you want to give towards the security controls you're putting into place.
Yeah, definitely. And when we talk about granularity and the level of protection that each enterprise seeks, right, because some people are a little more comfortable to have fewer layers. Do you think Is it always just a function of available resources, or is it certain sector strategy, or what do you think is the main function, what to take into consideration?
I think it always needs to start in terms of what are the requirements that allow the business to function. So for example, like what we just talked about, are there legislative and regulatory requirements involved? In the absence of that, i.e. in the absence of compliance requirements, is there a business motivation, right, for the enterprise to invest into security resources to protect their business? Let me give an example. Manufacturing, right? In the manufacturing industry, you don't necessarily have a digital facing gateway to tell the entire world, aside from, making your services and goods and services publicly known, right? So as a typical information security professional, we only say that, okay, there's no confidentiality because you want to make your services, goods and services known. So you're only talking about availability or potential reputational damage, right? Where it comes to defacement of your website itself, or being made unavailable so that you don't have the digital marketing being made available. So that level of impact to the organization often looks to be quantified, but it's not a easy quantification to be made. And again, that's a different topic for another time. But again, how do you then justify, we need to have at least basic hygiene, right? How do you then justify having the right controls in place? So then we talk about the manufacturing lines where you have technology enabling it across the sector. You call it IoT, IT, OT, whichever it is. There is still that concept of technology risk management that needs to be involved, that goes beyond cybersecurity, because it actually involves physical security as well. And that is where I still adopt a more traditional approach towards information security, which is start from the physical, then go into the digital, right? Because if I can do all the best cybersecurity defenses, but if I leave my server in a grassy field without, with no protection, with no elements, then someone can just buy a $5 spanner and start having at it right at my server. Then what does that really come down to at the end of the day? So I think that discussion is a bit different, but given that we are always evolving that understanding, but there's also sometimes the need, right, as to the question itself, to take a step back to come back to what was the
initial point.
So that this is what I call a rabbit hole. Sometimes we jump into the rabbit hole and we kind of got lost within the tunnels. But again, that cybersecurity is really interesting in that. In its own way for that.
And, as we were talking, right, what is the right step to start? You mentioned physical security, then digital security. What I see a lot is, as I speak to CISOs, heads of security, one of their biggest troubles is, how do I go about and communicate the need for certain security tool, measure, or whatever? I have to constantly fight with the board that we do need this. And it's so hard to communicate that, okay, we actually need this unless something bad happens.
Okay. So within my limited experience, right, compared to some of the CISOs that you have spoken to, I think the discussion primarily is a risk management one, but I think the angle in which the conversation needs to take place needs to occur on differing levels. What I mean by that is, often the times, in my past experience, product owners or application system owners, they will talk about what my application system needs or what kind of security controls we need to put in place. But from the business stakeholder management perspective is that, sorry, which application are you talking about again? What does it serve? How does it serve our business? They forgot to bring that conversation back to which business process, right, revenue generating or otherwise, would be impacted. So let me give you a very two very clear examples. On the one end, you have payment systems, right, where the conversation, if you tell them, if my payment API gateway goes down, right?
No more money.
And we're talking about second 5-6 digit or even 5-6 digits worth of dollars, right? US, right? Not any other dollars per second, right? And the other side, you have my HR system may go down and you can't pay your employees. So which is more important? Or how do you actually evaluate the impact of both? And therein comes the understanding on legislative and regulatory requirements, because on one hand, it's very clear. There are certain fixed ones, but on the other side, what's the impact if you're in a different country compared to Singapore, right? Where that HR impact allows maybe your entire workforce to just walk out on you. Right? So I think the impact level needs to be discussed in that manner, because what kind of availability are you risking to shut down? Are you risking for your employees to just walk out on you? If there's a risk on that, or are you talking about a technology revenue impact? And so the conversation shouldn't be on which application system. It should shift towards which business process or business impact, and that cannot be, this application have this vulnerability, having this, this critical finding that is not unresolved, so I need to get a new tool to target that. It needs to encapsulate this problem would cause your business process to have these problems in an impact. And then how do you logically and reasonably show that this is the real impact? And I think that's where business stakeholders would have their risk review boards, for example, right? Having their technology, IT architecture team, network architecture team, everyone who understands their core competency. And then the security risk management professional would have to say, like, look, IT, you didn't You didn't use the benchmarks. You didn't. So we are having these vulnerabilities, which leads to this. Network security, where are my hardening of my firewalls? You know, my ports. How have we ensured that there's only authorized and legitimate traffic within the perimeter? So these are the kinds of conversation that the security person will need to have to justify to say that, okay, if we don't have this, business impact would be affected like that. And this is what I would still look to deliver to, you know, our clients and partners at softScheck. But aside the point, that I think is really the focus or the conversation may not have been correctly scoped and presented, right? Because most of us are still technical by nature, right? That shift in mindset, that presentation, right, and communication needs to change, to evolve, to make it make sense, right? And then when we talk about impact, are we no longer able to generate money, or we are risking your workforce walking out on you? I think that's where that collaboration and partnership with upstream and downstream stakeholders, especially in legal, especially in procurement, especially with those who are the product owners, becomes that combination of factors that really drives what is appropriate for each organization and each department.
Definitely. And just to add another level of complexity to it is,
for sure,
in different geographies, right? They prioritize different goals. And then if you work for a multinational organization, in one country, there is one priority, in different countries, different, right?
For sure.
So how do you really pinpoint and how to say, be able to speak different languages for different geographies at the same time? I just...
Well, one advantage of, at least in Singapore, for me personally at least, is being bilingual, right? Understanding Mandarin and being able to hold both professional conversations in both English and Mandarin is definitely a step up. So in some of my past roles, I've been responsible for APAC level or Southeast Asia level or APAC level projects. And then you are still able to support the global level because everyone speaks English, right? So that enables a lot of conversations to be had and also interpretation of the legislative and regulatory requirements when they are presented from the business stakeholders. So one of it I still remember clearly was a Japanese financial institution. So they were saying that this certification or requirement meets our expectations and requirements. And they shared with me the entire legislation, right, by the Japanese regulatory authority. So I said, okay, sure. I looked through the entire thing. I pointed out to them that if you said that you have this, you have already done this, then that's where you are telling me as well that you have actually significant security problems that triggered the authority to do this based on clause blah 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 blah, which section, which identification. So is that what you're telling me? So then that's where the conversation pivoted and we had a more application system level conversation about what needs to happen and you know, how can we really meet the third party requirements of our organization.
That's very interesting because a lot of times, you know, someone might be saying one thing, but what they really imply is completely different, and being able to read between the lines
and also having the interest and energy to dig into it until 3 a.m. in the morning sometimes to really have that understanding. But that's, you know, the both, like I mentioned, that's both the fun and joy and the energy sapping part of information security. But ultimately, it still remains challenging yet very interesting, right? Because now I understand the financial world in Japan a lot better, right? And that's where sometimes that makes a difference when we have different conversations and how we're able to have a discussion that, you know, goes everywhere and yet centered around the information security at the same time.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, as we started speaking about more of how to say leadership style and what kind of qualities can help you differentiate yourself out there in cybersecurity space, whether it's being able to have this sort of conversations at 3 a.m. or anything else. What kind of qualities do you think really distinguish professionals that are able to grow faster on this career ladder in this space?
I think there is a clear need for genuine interest. I don't want to call it passion because passion is very subjective, but you need to have genuine interest, energy, and capacity to look into things until 3, 5 a.m. in the morning.
Yeah.
Right? That's part of it because there's so many things to understand, so many things to learn. And sometimes communications break down or understanding is incomplete to ensure that you know when to engage the right stakeholders to have that. So all I can say is, adjust as you go along, adopt a more agile, scrum meeting like mindsets when you approach work.
Yeah.
Because at every stage in time, there's something to reconsolidate, something I share with my mentees a lot as well, to reconsolidate, recrystallize your understanding before you determine what's the next best action to take, right? If you are limited in time, do what you can. Use LLMs. Make sure you don't have any confidential information in your prompts.
Yeah.
But you can learn something over there. At least consolidate that, have a baseline knowledge to engage your stakeholders further and be open to admit to mistakes and learn along the way. Right? And that's how I've, in some sense, stumbled across the COVID period, across many of my past experiences, past organizations. And then you will find that you actually have a more complete understanding than hopefully not most, but you at least have a logical and reasonable understanding you can present to your stakeholders. Yeah,
definitely. I think it's more about resilience rather than passion itself. It's just being able to go through all of these things. And so one of the things that we like to do, Tyler, in our podcast is that a previous guest would ask question to our next guest.
Okay.
So this is what our previous guest asked you. So the question is, 10 years down the line, if you got bored of security, what would you do? What's the next area you'd pivot towards and see where life takes you?
Wow. Okay. Well, for a start, I don't think I will get bored of security because like what we just mentioned, there's so many different facets to security that can be gone into.
Yeah.
Right. Not just on a domain level, but so many different angles that we have to tackle that topic.
That's good.
So don't think in the next 10 years I'll get bored of it. But if I do somehow get bored of it, returning back to my roots in martial arts, or, adopting a more, to enable the community to think about that conversation better, not as a, paid public speaker or anything, but it's really more towards how do we correctly volunteer and enable the industry to think correctly. And that is something that reasons why I still stay with the ISC2 Singapore Chapter, but definitely something that I want to drive the industry in a different way.
Yeah.
Right? How to critically think sometimes is actually what is missing from the conversations, because we are sometimes myopic given our roles and responsibilities of organizations and, with a lot of other different factors that you and I both understand about.
Yeah.
So I would go into hopefully an area that is still very similar to security in the same mindset of, protecting people or whatever. If there is, the military or the SPF, who knows, right? Yeah. But again, thinking 10 years into the future is sometimes a bit far off as well. I like to think of things at the next 1, max 2 years.
Yeah.
Right?
Wow.
Because, my journey has been tumultuous. I would not expect it to be too smooth sailing as well. Because there's so many things that can happen in the world.
Yeah, clearly. And I'll make sure to ping you 10 years down the line just to check what is martial arts, cybersecurity, anything else that comes to mind. Yeah. And what question would you like to ask our next guest?
That's something that I would have to think about. But I would say, how can we better communicate, right, with anyone and everyone who wants to know about cybersecurity? right? Is it really more about making it understandable to a specific age group, right? Or how can we have a more complex conversation, right, around information security as a discipline, right? And then have that right journey alongside the stakeholders that we work with.
Yeah, I think it's awesome. Very, very deep question for consideration. Well, thank you so much, Tyler, for coming to our Be Fearless podcast.
Thanks for having me.
It's been fun.
It was.
Yeah.